In the name of Christ who calls us. Christ who calls us. Christ who calls us. Christ who calls us. One of the reasons I've made the Episcopal Church my home is because of how comfortable she is with paradox and poetry. John Donne, George Manley Hopkins, George Herbert, some of my favorite poets were also Anglican priests. So no wonder that one of my favorite hymns is Ralph Vaughan Williams' setting of George Herbert's The Call. This poem was first published in 1633. Yet it is so simple, so short. It is still so pertinent to our life today. The call. Come my way, my truth, my life, such a way as gives us breath, such a truth as ends all strife, and such a life as killeth death. Come my light, my feast, my strength, such a light as shows a feast, such a feast as mends in length, such a strength as makes his guest. Come my joy, my love, my heart, such a joy as none can move, such a love as none can part, such a heart as joys in love. This idea of call shines through our lessons of Scripture today and speaks to us now, especially on this patronal feast day of St. Stephen, the day of our annual meeting. In the gospel reading appointed for today, Matthew's story picks up just after Jesus has returned from his 40 days in the wilderness, struggling with the powers of evil. He returns to find that John the Baptist has been arrested by that fox, Herod. Does Jesus withdraw to safety? No. He goes into the very area under Herod Antipas' rule, east of the Sea of Galilee, preaching good news to the downtrodden, healing the sick, and teaching in the synagogues. More than that, he finds some Hebrew scholars, learned scholars, and calls them to help him teach. No, that's not right. He finds some wealthy nobility and he calls them to support his ministry with the peasants. No, that's not right either. He finds some elders in the most holy families and calls them to preach their patriarchal wisdom with him. No. Of course not. He finds some guys fishing and he asks their sons to come follow him. Notice, this is not in the urban power center of Jerusalem, but right here in Galilee. This call comes in the midst of everyday life, at work, not on the Sabbath. This call comes in a time of injustice and oppression, when instruments of tithes, taxes, tolls, rents, tribute, and confiscation ensured that most people had all they could do to maintain a subsistence living. Peter, Andrew, James, and John left not only their livelihood and their families, but a system that divided haves and have-nots across an ever-deepening chasm. The call comes just as we have been reminded that for those who sat in darkness, the region and shadow of death, light has dawned. Come, my way, my truth, my life, such a way as gives us breath, such a truth as ends all strife, and such a life as killeth death. It's a little different with Stephen. Like Galilee, the community in Acts was more ethnically diverse than the ideal purity a Pharisee might have secretly hoped for. We're told previously that the early believers held all things in common, living lives of devotion and mutual support. And yet, even in this New Jerusalem, there was discord. The Greek-speaking Jews complained of the treatment of their widows. The response of the leadership? You choose who will be in charge of the food distribution. And with words that remind one of Mary and Martha, serving the word is upheld over serving at table. But what happens next? The community chooses, and their choices all have Greek names. One wasn't even born a Jew, but is a proselyte from Antioch, a distant Turkish city we'll hear more of from Luke later on. The apostles pray and lay on hands, and Stephen puts on his apron, drapes a stole across his left shoulder diagonally across the body to the right hip, and spends the rest of his life volunteering at Fish. No. Actually, the only person called a deacon in the Bible is Phoebe, who took Paul's letter to the church in Rome. She was commended as one who should be esteemed highly because of her work and character. Stephen seems to epitomize servanthood leadership. That is, filled with grace and power, he spread the Gospels, doing wonders and great signs among the peoples. In art, there are several symbols associated with Stephen. He's often seen with stones, prefiguring his status as proto-martyr, the first person to die for their witness to the gospel. He's seen holding a small church and an incense burner, a thurible, symbols of prayer, and his role in the formation of the early church. And because the Greek for his name, Stephanos, translates as crown, he can be shown with a crown, but usually one of thorns. Have you ever noticed our statue of St. Stephen outside, above the doors to the sanctuary? This beautiful sculpture by Everett Dupin shows one of the most consistent hallmarks of Stephen. The Bible he holds up and to which he points. Shortly after the passage we hear today, Stephen gives a long sermon, the longest speech in the book of Acts, pointing to scripture after scripture to bring his listeners to understand Christ. His subsequent stoning is cautionary to long-winded preachers everywhere. No. What enraged his listeners, to the extent that they started to pick up rocks, was not that he was simply a man of good standing or great faith, great belief. In the video for our Saving Jesus study, we heard last week that English lacks a verb form for faith. We don't say faithing, when in fact, faith must cry out. Faith speaks. Faith acts. These are the acts of the apostles. And after the apostles prayed over him, Stephen did not serve by merely thinking nice thoughts, but answered his call in word and deed, in hospitality, welcoming widows, serving strangers, proclaiming the good news, even to those who called him enemy, even unto death. Come, my light, my feast, my strength, such a light as shows a feast, such a feast as mends in length, such a strength as makes a guest. So what is our call? Who are we called to be? Where are we going to cast our nets? That is our work tonight at the annual meeting, when we vote on our budget, when we share our concerns for what the prayer book calls the whole state of Christ's church, and when we as a community choose our vestry, the people who run the secular business of this church. Later in the evening, at their first meeting, the rector's warden will be appointed by our rector, and the people's warden will be elected by the members of the vestry. In 16th century England, a warden had the keys to the church in case the clergy was away or I suppose, locked themselves out. Today, our wardens still have the keys to the church, and by canon law, ensure worship services continue during the absence of clergy. St. Stephen's wardens meet weekly with the rector, providing a sounding board, assisting with articulating the mission and vision of the parish, managing its day-to-day operations, identifying and nurturing leaders, and empowering members of the congregation to live out the gospel in their daily lives. Our vestry, in turn, will consider our call at their retreat next month as they work out the particulars of putting our corporate vision into action. By corporate, I not only mean that we are, in a legal sense, a corporation, but more importantly, who we are in community. Christian life in Longview or Galilee is life in community. Deciding how we live out our faith in the world is the work of each one of us at every moment. In the words of David Cooper, the sacred call is transformative. It is an invitation to our souls, a mysterious voice reverberating within, a tug on our hearts that can neither be ignored nor denied. It contains, by definition, the purest message and promise of essential freedom. It touches us at the center of our awareness. How do we reach that level of awareness? Listen. 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 Maybe you're at centering prayer and hear a still small voice in the silence of your heart. Maybe you're reading scripture or a novel or a newspaper, and you feel like the author's words were written just for you. Maybe you're going to the grocery store and make eye contact and really see a homeless person. Or give her a sandwich when you walk out. Maybe an outgoing vestry person calls and asks you to serve, and this time it was the right time and you said yes. Maybe your hand hesitates over the garbage can and a little nudge reminds you to drop the paper into the recycle instead. Maybe we move from hearing stewardship as some bad juju about money to understanding that we need to change how our behavior and attitudes affect the world around us. Maybe the next time your organization or agency or corporation or coalition or church meets, instead of letting your eyes glaze over under a pall of boredom, you hear that purest message at the center of your awareness, and you say something out loud. You encourage the folks you're with to actually do something, even if it is a little scary. Maybe today is the day to stand up and start dancing. Come, my joy, my love, my heart. Such a joy as none can move, such a love as none can part, such a heart as joys in love.